The cold hit her like a death sentence. Sergeant Nadia Vishenko pulled herself along the submerged rocks, lungs burning, fingers numb, the rifle case strapped to her back dragging against the current like an anchor trying to claim her for the river bottom. For minutes underwater, maybe 5, her body screamed for air, but her mind kept counting. 30 more meters. 20. The current tore at her legs, and she felt her grip slipping on the slick stone beneath her hands. She surfaced for 2 seconds, gasped, saw the enemy compound lights flickering on the far bank like yellow eyes watching for movement. And she went back under, back into the black water that wanted to kill her. Gunnery Sergeant Crenshaw had told her she would drown before she made it halfway. He had said it in front of the entire platoon with that look on his face, the one that said he was not just predicting her failure, but counting on it. She intended to prove him wrong or die in this river trying. But 18 hours ago, she had not known any of this would happen. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed acts of courage in your own community. The mortar round hit the fuel depot at 0347 and turned the night into screaming chaos. Vishenko was already running before the second impact, boots pounding dirt, debris raining down around her like the sky itself was falling apart. She counted the interval between explosions. 4 seconds. Consistent. Trained crew operating that mortar, not amateurs lobbing rounds and hoping for luck. She reached the medical tent as the third round hit somewhere near the motor pool. Inside was organized panic. Corpsmen shouting, wounded Marines groaning, the copper smell of blood mixing with antiseptic and fear. A young private lay on a stretcher, barely 19 years old, his stomach torn open by shrapnel. His eyes found hers and locked on like she was the only solid thing in a world coming apart. She took his hand without thinking about it. His grip was weak, but desperate. "Are you really a sniper?" he asked through clenched teeth. His voice was barely a whisper. She nodded. "My sister wants to be one," he said. "She is only 15, but she can outshoot everyone in our county. Dad says women cannot do it, but I told her about you. Told her you made it." The corpsman was working fast, tried to stop bleeding that did not want to stop. Vishenko squeezed the private's hand tighter. "What is your sister's name?" she asked. "Kaylee. You tell Kaylee she can do anything she decides to do. And you tell her the men who did this to you are never going to fire another round. I promise you that." The private tried to smile, but his face had gone pale. The corpsman looked up at Vishenko, and she saw the truth in his eyes. This boy was not going to make it off the table. She stayed with him until he lost consciousness, then stepped outside into the chaos and let the rage settle into her bones like ice forming in her bloodstream. Somewhere across that river, 4 men were loading another round. They had no idea what was coming for them. Captain Tessa Bledsoe found her an hour later, still standing outside the medical tent, still covered in the private's blood. The captain's face was hard in the way that command makes faces hard when there are no good options left. "Conference room in 20 minutes, Bledsoe said. "Bring whatever idea you have been sitting on. We are out of conventional options, and those mortars are going to keep killing my Marines until someone figures out how to stop them." Vishenko nodded, but did not move right away. She watched the medevac helicopter lift off carrying 3 wounded and 1 dead body in a black bag. Somewhere in that bag was a boy who believed in his sister and had believed in her. She went to her quarters first. The small space she had carved out in a building that used to be an Afghan police station before it became an American forward operating base. Her gear was organized with precision, everything in its place because that was how she had been trained and because chaos in your equipment meant chaos in your mind. From beneath her rack, she pulled a small wooden box. Inside was a scope that did not match any standard military issue. Old glass, scratched housing, a crack running along one side that had been repaired with epoxy decades ago. Her father's hunting scope, the one he had used in the Carpathian Mountains before he brought his family to America. The one he had placed in her hands when she was 6 years old and told her that some people are born knowing how to find their target, and she was one of them. He died 3 months before she earned her Scout sniper qualification. Cancer took him faster than anyone expected. She never got to show him the certificate, never got to see his face when they pinned on her insignia, Never got to hear him say he was proud, even though she knew he would have been. She held the scope up to her eye and looked at nothing in particular, just feeling the weight of it, the history of it, the promise it represented. For targets, Papa, she whispered in the empty room. Give me steady hands and clear eyes. Then she packed the scope carefully back into its box, secured her equipment, and walked toward the conference room, where 17 men were about to hear a plan that most of them would call impossible. The conference room was crowded and hostile. Vishenko recognized the faces. Sniper platoon, intelligence officers, Captain Bledsoe at the head of the table with a map spread out showing the river and the compound beyond it, and standing against the far wall with his arms crossed and his eyes already dismissing her before she spoke a single word, Gunnery Sergeant Wade Crenshaw. She had been the target of that look for 11 months now, ever since she transferred into the battalion as one of the first female scout snipers in Marine Corps history. Crenshaw had never said anything directly actionable, never crossed a line that would get him written up, but everyone knew how he felt about women in combat roles. He made sure they knew. Bledsoe gestured to the map. We have tried drone strikes, she said. Civilian structures too close, collateral damage unacceptable. We have tried ground assault, but the bridge is destroyed and the forward points are mined. We have tried helicopter insertion, but they hear us coming and scatter before we can engage. For 3 weeks, that mortar team has been killing my people, and we cannot touch them. She looked around the room. I am open to suggestions. Silence. The intelligence officer shuffled papers. The platoon sergeant studied his boots. Crenshaw's expression did not change. Vishenko raised her hand. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Some curious, some skeptical. Crenshaw's narrowing with something that looked like anticipation of her failure. There's another way across that river, she said. The room went quiet in a way that made the silence feel heavy. Vishenko stepped forward to the map table, feeling the weight of every stair pressing against her back. She pointed to a section of the river approximately 200 meters downstream from the destroyed bridge. There's an underwater rock formation here, she said. Natural handholds running most of the way across. An Afghan interpreter named Karzai told me about it. His cousin used it to escape the Taliban 8 years ago. The current is strong, but manageable if you know the path. Crenshaw made a sound in his throat, something between a laugh and a grunt of disgust. You want to swim across the Helmand River at night, he said, in water cold enough to cause hypothermia in 15 minutes, carrying a rifle and equipment, then set up a hide and engage 4 targets at extended range. Alone. Not alone, Vishenko replied. I will need a spotter. Captain Bledsoe studied the map with an expression that gave nothing away. What is the distance from the far bank to the compound? She asked. Vishenko had already calculated it a dozen times. 847 meters from the drainage culvert on the far bank to the mortar position. Long range, but within the capability of the M40A6. The culvert provides natural concealment and a stable shooting platform. I engaged the targets during their pre-dawn mortar run when all 4 are visible in the open. 4 shots for kills, then exfiltrate back across the river before they can organize a response. The intelligence officer leaned forward. The current in that section runs 4 to 6 knots depending on conditions. Even with the rock path, that is an extremely dangerous crossing. I am aware of the risks, Vishenko said. Crenshaw pushed off from the wall and walked toward the table. His presence seemed to fill the room in a way that made other men shrink back without realizing they were doing it. He had 20 years in the Corps and a reputation built on operations that most people would never hear about. When he spoke, people listened. I have seen Marines drown in calmer water than that, he said. Good Marines. Strong Marines. Men who trained for years and still could not beat the current when it decided to take them. He stopped directly across the table from Vishenko and fixed her with those squinting eyes that had watched countless targets die through a rifle scope. This is not a training exercise, Sergeant. This is a suicide mission dressed up as a tactical operation. You will drown before you make it halfway across, and then we will be down 1 sniper and still have a mortar team killing our people. Vishenko held his gaze without blinking. With respect, Gunnery Sergeant, I am not asking for your approval. I am presenting a viable option to the commanding officer. The tension between them crackled like static electricity before a lightning strike. Bledsoe let it hang for a moment before cutting in. The gunnery sergeant raises valid concerns, she said. But we have been raising concerns for 3 weeks while that mortar team racks up casualties. She looked at Vishenko. You really think you can make that crossing? Yes, ma'am. I know I can. Bledsoe was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Mission approved. Sergeant Vishenko, you will have 24 hours to prepare. I am assigning Lance Corporal Fuentes as your spotter. Crenshaw's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. The commanding officer had made her decision. The briefing ended and the room emptied. Vishenko was gathering her notes when she felt Crenshaw's presence behind her. He did not touch her, did not step too close, but his voice was low enough that only she could hear it. I knew a young Marine once, he said. Lance Corporal named Riley. Best natural shooter I ever trained. Fast hands, steady nerves, everything you want in a spotter. We were in Fallujah when things went sideways. Ambush. Heavy fire from 3 directions. I told him to move, and he froze. Just locked up like his brain stopped sending signals to his body. Crenshaw paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been pain if his face still remembered how to show it. I watched him die, he continued. Watched the rounds tear through him while I was pinned down 10 meters away, unable to do anything. He was 20 years old. Wanted to be a police officer when he got out. Had a girlfriend back home who was planning their wedding. Vishenko said nothing. She understood what he was doing, understood the manipulation behind the story, but she also recognized genuine grief when she heard it. I'm not telling you this to be cruel, Crenshaw said. I am telling you because I have seen what happens when people take on missions they are not ready for. You're going to get yourself killed out there, and maybe that is your choice to make. But you're also going to get Fuentes killed. That boy has a family too. He walked away before she could respond. She stood alone in the empty conference room, his words settling into her mind like stones dropping into still water. He was wrong about her. She knew that with absolute certainty. But the doubt he planted was insidious because it was wrapped in truth. People did die on missions like this. Young people with families and futures. She found Lance Corporal Diego Fuentes at the armory, cleaning his weapon with the methodical precision of someone who needed to keep his hands busy. He was 22 years old, wiry build, dark eyes that were currently avoiding her gaze. He knew she was coming. Lance Corporal, she said. Sergeant. He still did not look up. You have concerns about this mission. It was not a question, but he answered anyway. I requested a transfer to a different assignment. Captain Bledsoe denied it. Vishenko pulled up a crate and sat down across from him. She waited until he finally met her eyes. Tell me what you are afraid of, she said. His jaw worked for a moment before the words came out. Dying. Dying because my sniper could not perform when it mattered. Dying in a river in Afghanistan because someone wanted to prove a point about women in combat. The honesty was brutal, but she respected it. She had asked for truth, and he had given it. I am not trying to prove a point, she said. I am trying to eliminate a mortar team that has killed 6 Marines in 3 weeks. That is the mission. Nothing else. Fuentes studied her face like he was looking for something. Doubt maybe. Fear. Some crack in her confidence that would confirm his suspicions. Whatever he found seemed to surprise him. You really think we can do this, he said. Vishenko leaned forward. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. I do not miss. Not when it matters. Not when lives are on the line. You can believe Crenshaw, or you can believe my record. 11 confirmed kills across 2 deployments. 0 misses on any shot that counted. Tomorrow night, I'm going to swim across that river, and I'm going to put 4 men in the ground. The only question is whether you're going to be there to spot for me, or whether I'm going alone. Fuentes was quiet for a long time. Then something shifted in his expression. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of it. I will be there, he said. Good. She stood up and extended her hand. He shook it. We start preparation at 0500, she said. Get some sleep. She left him there and walked out into the night air. The stars were bright over the mountains, and somewhere across the river 4 men were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their deaths were already being planned with precision and patience. She returned to her quarters and pulled out her father's scope again, held it up toward the window where the moonlight caught the old glass. Tomorrow she would check her equipment and find something wrong. She did not know that yet. She only knew that sleep would be difficult, and that doubt was a luxury she could not afford. She closed her eyes and saw the dying private's face, heard his voice asking about his sister. "I keep my promises," she whispered to no one. Then she lay down on her rack and waited for morning. She found the problem at 0530 while the rest of the base was still waking up. Her rifle was where she had left it, locked in the armory cage with her name on the tag. But the moment she lifted it to her shoulder, she knew something was wrong. The balance was off, subtle but unmistakable to someone who had fired 10,000 rounds through this weapon. She checked the scope mount first. Loose. Not obviously loose, not enough that a casual inspection would catch it, but enough that her zero would be completely destroyed. At 800 meters, even a fraction of a degree meant the difference between a killing shot and a clean miss. Someone had sabotaged her equipment. Vishenko stood alone in the armory, holding the rifle that was supposed to save lives in 18 hours, and felt the cold certainty of betrayal settling into her chest. She could not prove who did it. The armory was accessible to anyone in the sniper platoon and half a dozen other personnel. No cámaras, no witnesses, just her word against whoever had decided that her failure was more important than the mission. She could report it, file a complaint, watch the investigation go nowhere while the mortar team kept killing Marines. Or she could fix it herself and never say a word. She chose silence. There would be time for justice later. Right now, there was only the mission. Fuentes found her 2 hours later at the zero range, methodically firing round after round into a target 300 meters downrange. He watched her adjust the scope in tiny increments, fire again, check the impact, adjust again. The process was tedious and exacting, and she had been at it since before sunrise. "Something wrong with your zero?" he asked. "Equipment malfunction," she said without looking up. "It happens." He studied her face for a moment longer than necessary. She wondered if he suspected the truth. If he did, he was smart enough not to say it out loud. "What do I do?" he asked. She finally looked at him. "Get the waterproofing materials from supply. We need to seal the rifle case and all electronics. The river is going to try to kill our equipment before it tries to kill us." He nodded and left without asking more questions. She appreciated that about him. Some people needed to fill silence with words. Fuentes understood that sometimes silence was the only appropriate response. By noon, she had restored her zero and begun the painstaking process of waterproofing every piece of essential gear. The rifle went into a sealed case with multiple layers of protection. Ammunition stored in watertight containers. Electronics triple-bagged with desiccant packets. Her father's scope wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into an interior pocket where the river could not reach it. Corporal Yusuf Karzai came to find her during the afternoon heat. The Afghan interpreter was young, but carried himself with the weight of someone who had seen too much death before his 25th birthday. His family had been killed by the Taliban when he was 16. He had been working with American forces ever since, trading his knowledge for the chance at revenge. "You are really going to try the underwater path," he said. It was not a question. "Your cousin made a cross," Vishenko replied. "Tell me exactly how." Karzai sat down across from her and drew a rough map in the dirt with his finger. "The rocks start here, about 15 meters from the bank. They run in a line toward the northwest, following an old geological formation. My cousin said you have to stay low, use the rocks as handholds, let the current push you along the path instead of fighting it." "How deep is the water over the rocks?" 2 meters in most places, sometimes less. There's one section near the middle where the formation dips and the water is deeper. Maybe 4 meters. You'll have to swim through that part without anything to hold on to. Vishenko memorized every detail. The depth changes, the current patterns, the places where the rocks were slippery with algae and the places where they offered solid grip. "Your cousin," she said. "He made a cross?" Karzai's expression flickered with something sad. He made it across. The Taliban caught him on the other side 2 days later. They made an example of him in the village square. I'm sorry. Karzai shrugged in the way that people shrug when grief has become too familiar to acknowledge. He believed in something worth dying for. I think you understand that. She did understand, more than she could explain. The afternoon dragged on, and the heat pressed down on the base like a physical weight. Vashenko ran through her equipment checks again. Then again. The repetition was soothing, each step a confirmation that she had done everything possible to prepare for what was coming. She was sealing the last of her gear when the first mortar round hit. The explosion was closer than usual, close enough that she felt the shockwave ripple through the ground beneath her feet. She was moving before the dust settled, running toward the impact site with her heart pounding against her ribs. The round had hit near the sniper billets. Her billets. The place where she slept, where Fuentes slept, where the rest of the platoon stored their personal gear. She found Fuentes on the ground, blood streaming from his left leg, a piece of shrapnel the size of a playing card embedded in his thigh. He was conscious, cursing steadily in Spanish, trying to put pressure on the wound with hands that would not stop shaking. Vashenko dropped beside him and took over. The bleeding was bad, but not arterial. He would live. He would walk again eventually. But he was not swimming across any rivers tonight. "Corpseman," she shouted. "I need a corpseman here now." Help arrived within minutes. They loaded Fuentes onto a stretcher while he grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "The mission," he said through gritted teeth. "I will handle it. You cannot go alone." "That is insane." She looked down at him with an expression that left no room for argument. "Watch me." They carried him away toward the medical tent, and she stood in the rubble of what had been the sniper billets, covered in dust and her spotter's blood, understanding with perfect clarity what had just happened. Someone had told the enemy exactly where to aim. The same someone who had sabotaged her rifle. The mortar team was not just killing randomly anymore. They were targeting her specifically. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt something cold and focused crystallizing in her chest. They knew she was coming. They thought they could stop her before she started. They were wrong. She found Captain Bledsoe in the command post, already receiving reports on the attack. 2 wounded, including Fuentes. No fatalities this time, but only by luck. "I'm going alone," Vashenko said. Bledsoe looked up from her maps. "That is against doctrine. A sniper without a spotter is operating at half effectiveness. Doctrine assumes we have options. We do not. If I wait for another spotter to be briefed, we lose the element of surprise. They already know something is coming. If I wait, they relocate and we start over with nothing." Bledsoe studied her for a long moment. The captain was a pragmatist. She dealt in realities, not regulations. "If you're not back by 0600, I am sending a QRF to find you," Bledsoe said finally. "Do not make me send Marines to recover a body." "Understood." She turned to leave, but Bledsoe's voice stopped her. "Sergeant." The captain's expression softened by a fraction. "Good hunting." Vashenko nodded once. Then she walked out into the fading afternoon light to prepare for a mission that everyone expected her to fail. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In a few hours, she would slip into water cold enough to stop her heart. She would cross a river that had killed better swimmers than her. She would set up alone in enemy territory and put 4 rounds into 4 targets before they knew death had found them. Crenshaw had said she would drown before she made it halfway. She intended to make him eat those words. The medical tent smelled like antiseptic and blood. Vashenko found Fuentes on a cot near the back, his leg wrapped in fresh bandages, and 4 drip feeding fluids into his arm. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert when she approached. "You look terrible," he said. "You should see the other guy." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wince. The pain medication was wearing off. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched between words. She sat down on the empty cot beside him and pulled something from her pocket. The street Christopher medal he wore around his neck, recovered from the rubble of the billets. The chain was broken, but the medal itself was intact. "Thought you might want this back," she said. He took it with trembling fingers and held it up to the dim light. His grandmother had given it to him before his first deployment. Protection for travelers over water. The irony was not lost on either of them. "I should be going with you," he said. "You should be resting. This is wrong. A sniper alone in enemy territory with no support, no backup, no one watching the angles he cannot see. It goes against everything we trained for." Vishenko leaned forward. "Listen to me. What happened today was not an accident. Someone told them where to aim. Someone on this base is feeding information to that mortar team. The same someone who knocked my scope out of zero yesterday." Fuentes stared at her. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to cold anger. "Who?" he asked. "I do not know yet, but I'm going to find out. After I finish what I started." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pressed the Street Christopher medal into her hand. "Take it," he said, "for the water. Bring it back to me when you are done." She closed her fingers around the small piece of metal. It was still warm from his grip. "I will," she said. "That is a promise." She left him there and walked out into the evening air. The sun had dipped below the mountains, and the sky was fading from orange to purple to the deep blue that came before full darkness. 2 hours until she entered the water. 2 hours to finish her preparations and make peace with whatever was waiting for her on the other side. Crenshaw was waiting outside the medical tent. He stood with his arms crossed, silhouette sharp against the dying light, watching her approach with an expression she could not read. "I heard about Fuentes," he said, "and I heard you are still going. The mission has not changed. The mission is suicide now. You understand that? One sniper, no spotter, swimming a river in the dark to engage multiple targets at extended range. The odds of you coming back alive just dropped to almost nothing. Almost nothing is not nothing." He shook his head slowly. "You are determined to prove something. I understand that. But there are better ways to prove it than dying in a river in Afghanistan." Vishenko stepped closer to him, close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his stubble, the years of combat written into every crease of his weathered face. "Let me tell you something, Gunnery Sergeant. 6 Marines are dead because of that mortar team. 3 more are wounded, including my spotter. A 19-year-old private bled out on a table last night, and the last thing he talked about was his little sister who wants to be a sniper someday. I made him a promise. I told him the men who did this would never fire another round." She held his gaze without flinching. "I'm not doing this to prove anything to you. I am not doing this because I am a woman trying to earn respect in a man's world. I am doing this because it needs to be done and I'm the only one who can do it. So you can stand here and tell me all the ways I'm going to fail, or you can get out of my way and let me do my job." Crenshaw said nothing. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not respect exactly, but something close to it. Something that might grow into respect if she came back alive. He stepped aside without another word. She walked past him toward her quarters to collect her gear. Behind her, she heard him say something so quiet it was almost lost in the evening wind. "Good luck, Sergeant." She did not turn around, but she heard it, and somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where doubt lived, something loosened just a little. The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations. She dressed in her wetsuit, checked her equipment one last time, painted her face with camouflage that would not wash off in the water. The rifle case went on her back, strapped tight, the weight familiar and reassuring. Extra ammunition sealed in waterproof pouches. A knife on her belt. Fuentes' medal around her neck, tucked beneath the wetsuit where the river could not take it. She made her way to the water's edge as full darkness settled over the valley. The Helmand River stretched before her, black and cold, moonlight catching the ripples where the current broke against hidden rocks. On the far side, barely visible in the darkness, the lights of the enemy compound flickered like distant stars. 800 meters beyond those lights, for men were sleeping, or eating, or cleaning their weapons, living the final hours of their lives without knowing that death was about to slip into the water and swim toward them with patient, relentless purpose. Vishenko stood at the river's edge and let herself feel the fear. Really feel it. The cold water waiting to steal her body heat. The current waiting to drag her downstream into open water where she would drown alone in the dark. The 400 meters of underwater navigation through a path she had never seen, guided only by the memory of a dead man's cousin and a map drawn in the dirt. She could die tonight. That was real. That was possible. But so could the men who had killed 6 Marines, who had wounded Fuentes, who had made a promise to a dying boy meaningless. She was not going to let that happen. She waded into the water, and the cold hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment her body tried to retreat, every nerve screaming that this was wrong. This was death. This was madness. She kept walking. The water rose to her waist, her chest, her shoulders. She could feel the current pulling at her legs, testing her balance, probing for weakness. She took one last breath of night air, fixed her eyes on the far bank, and went under. The world became cold and dark and silent. Above her the surface glittered with reflected moonlight. Below her the rocks waited, invisible in the murky water, the path that would carry her to the other side or kill her trying. She reached out and found the first handhold. Solid stone beneath her fingers, worn smooth by centuries of current. She began to pull herself forward, one rock at a time, into the darkness. The cold was a living thing. It wrapped around her body and squeezed, forcing the warmth out of her muscles, turning her fingers into clumsy instruments that barely responded to commands. Vashenko pulled herself along the submerged rocks, counting seconds in her head, fighting the urge to surface before she absolutely had to. 45 seconds. 50. Her lungs began to burn. She found a gap between 2 rocks and let her face break the surface just enough to gulp air. 1 breath. 2. Then back under before anyone on the far bank could spot the disturbance. The rifle case dragged against her back like an anchor. She had tested the waterproofing a dozen times, but doubt crept in anyway. If the seals failed, if water reached the weapon, everything she had sacrificed to get here would mean nothing. She would be a woman with a useless rifle in enemy territory, with no way to complete her mission and no way to get home. She pushed the thought away and kept moving. The rocks were exactly where Karzai had described them, a natural formation running northwest across the riverbed, close enough to the surface that she could use them as handholds, deep enough that the current did not smash her against them. She developed a rhythm. Reach forward, find the next rock, pull, kick, glide. Reach forward, find the next rock, pull, kick, glide. 60 meters from the bank. 70. 80. Then the rocks disappeared. She reached forward and found nothing. Empty water where solid stone should have been. The deep section Karzai had warned her about. For meters of open water with nothing to hold on to, nothing to guide her, just current and darkness and the desperate need to keep moving in the right direction. She surfaced for another breath and tried to orient herself. The compound lights were ahead and to her left. The FOB was behind her, impossibly far away. The current was pushing her downstream, away from her target line. She had maybe 30 seconds to cross the gap before the drift carried her too far off course. She filled her lungs and dove. The current grabbed her immediately. It was stronger here in the open water, channeled by the riverbed into a focused stream that wanted to sweep her away like debris. She kicked hard, angling against the flow, arms reaching for rocks that were not there. 20 seconds. Her lungs started to ache. 30 seconds. The ache became a burn. 40 seconds. Her vision started to narrow at the edges, darkness creeping in from the periphery. Her hand touched stone. She grabbed it with desperate strength and pulled herself down to the riverbed, anchoring her body against the current. The rocks were back. She had made it across the gap. She wanted to surface, wanted to breathe, wanted to rest. But she could see light above her now, moving across the water. Flashlights on the far bank. A patrol walking the shoreline. She pressed herself flat against the rocks and held her breath. 50 seconds underwater. 60. Her body screamed for oxygen, but her mind held firm. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, an old lesson from childhood hunting trips. Your body will lie to you, little wolf. It will tell you that you are dying when you are merely uncomfortable. Your mind knows the truth. Trust your mind. 70 seconds. The lights passed overhead and continued downstream. 80 seconds. The darkness in her vision was almost complete now. She exploded to the surface with a gasp that she barely managed to muffle. Air flooded her lungs, and for a moment the relief was so intense it felt like pain. She clung to a rock just below the surface, letting her body recover, watching the flashlight beams recede into the distance. They had not seen her. She was still invisible. She allowed herself 10 seconds of rest. Then she went back under. The last 60 meters were the hardest. Her body temperature had dropped into dangerous territory. Her muscles were sluggish, her reaction slow. The rocks became harder to find, her grip weaker with each handhold. Twice she slipped, and the current dragged her downstream before she caught herself. But she kept moving, rock by rock, breath by breath, pulling herself toward the far bank through water that wanted her dead. Her hand touched mud instead of stone. She had made it. Vashenko crawled out of the river on her belly, sliding through the reeds like a snake, leaving as little trace as possible. The bank was soft and muddy, sucking at her wetsuit, trying to hold her in place. She pulled herself through it by force of will alone. 10 meters from the water's edge, she collapsed behind a cluster of rocks and let herself shake. The tremors came in waves, her body's desperate attempt to generate heat, muscles spasming beyond her control. She had maybe 15 minutes before hypothermia became a serious problem. She forced herself to move, unstrapped the rifle case with numb fingers. Checked the seals. Dry. The weapon was dry. She almost laughed, almost cried, settled for a single breath of pure relief before focusing on what came next. The drainage culvert was 200 meters to the north. Her hide site, her shooting position, the place where she would wait for dawn and end 4 lives with 4 pulls of the trigger. She started crawling. The ground was rough and cold, scattered with rocks and thorny scrub that tore at her wetsuit. She moved slowly, stopping every few meters to scan for patrols, listening for any sound that did not belong to the night. The compound was 500 meters to her east, lights still burning, voices occasionally drifting across the distance. Somewhere in there, the mortar team was living their last night on Earth. She reached the culvert 40 minutes after leaving the water. It was exactly as Karzai had described. A concrete drainage pipe, partially collapsed, half buried in the embankment, just wide enough for one person to lie prone with a rifle. She slid inside and felt the darkness wrap around her like a blanket. For a long moment, she just lay there, breathing, letting her body temperature slowly climb back toward normal. The shaking subsided. Feeling returned to her fingers. The mission was still possible. She set up her position with practiced efficiency. Rifle braced on a small mound of dirt. Scope adjusted for the distance. Range to target confirmed at 847 meters. Wind reading noted, calculations running through her head automatically. Then she settled in to wait. Outside the culvert, the night stretched toward dawn. Somewhere behind her, across the river she had nearly died crossing, Fuentes was lying in a hospital cot with her promise hanging over him. Somewhere in the compound ahead, 4 men were sleeping peacefully, unaware that death had already arrived and was patient enough to wait for morning. She touched the street Christopher metal beneath her wetsuit. Still there, still warm against her skin. "Hold on," she whispered to no one. "I'm almost there." Then she put her eye to the scope and watched the darkness for any sign of movement. The hours before dawn moved like cold honey. Vashenko lay in the culvert with her, eye pressed to the scope, watching the compound through the green-gray haze of low-light conditions. Her body had stopped shaking, but the cold had settled into her bones, a deep ache that would not fade until she was somewhere warm and dry and safe. None of those things would happen until the mission was complete. She observed the compound methodically, building a mental map of the layout. 3 buildings arranged in a shape around a central courtyard. The mortar position was in the northeast corner, a circular pit reinforced with sandbags. She could see the tube itself, angled toward the mountains, toward FOB Copperhead, toward the people she had sworn to protect. Movement at 0217. A figure emerged from the largest building and walked toward the latrine on the western edge of the compound. She tracked him through her scope, studying his gait, his posture, the way he carried himself. Not military trained. Civilian clothes. Probably local support rather than a fighter. She let him pass, without interest. He was not her target. More movement at 0345. Two men emerged from the same building, talking in low voices. One of them gestured toward the mortar pit. The other laughed at something and shook his head. She studied their faces through the scope. Neither matched the intelligence photographs of the mortar team leader. Foot soldiers. Perimeter security maybe. Still not her targets. She settled back into stillness and let her mind drift while her eyes stayed sharp. This was the hardest part of being a sniper. Not the shooting. The shooting was easy compared to this. The waiting. The watching. The hours of absolute stillness while your body screamed for movement and your mind tried to wander into dangerous territory. She thought about her father. The hunting trips in Pennsylvania where he had taught her patience. Sitting in a blind for 6 hours waiting for a deer that might never come. He never complained, never fidgeted, never checked his watch. He simply existed in the moment, fully present, fully aware, ready for the opportunity when it arrived. You cannot rush the shot, little wolf. The shot comes when it comes. Your job is to be ready. She was ready. At 0412, the compound came alive. Lights flickered on in the main building. Voices rose in volume. She heard the clatter of equipment being moved, the distinctive sound of metal on metal. Through her scope, she watched a door open and a man step out into the pre-dawn darkness. She recognized him immediately. Farid Hassan, team leader, 34 years old, former Afghan National Army before he defected to the Taliban. 11 confirmed American kills to his name, including a helicopter crew he had brought down with a well-placed RPG 3 years ago. He was wearing a jacket that made her blood freeze in her veins. United States Marine Corps. Desert camouflage pattern. The eagle, globe, and anchor clearly visible on the left breast. And on the right shoulder, a unit patch she knew intimately. 2nd Battalion. 8th Marines. Her battalion. Someone had given him that jacket. Someone from FOB Copperhead. Someone who sat in briefings with her, ate in the same chow hall, slept in the same buildings. A traitor who had been feeding information to the enemy and was now watching them wear American uniforms as trophies. The rage hit her like a physical force. Her finger tightened on the trigger guard, every instinct screaming to take the shot now, to put Hassan down before he could take another breath in that stolen jacket. But that was not the mission. She forced herself to relax, forced her breathing to steady, forced the cold clarity of training to override the hot pulse of anger. 4 targets. She needed all 4 visible before she engaged. One shot out of sequence, and the others would scatter into the buildings where she could not reach them. The mission would fail. The mortar team would relocate. Marines would keep dying. She watched Hassan walk toward the mortar pit and begin giving orders. 2 more men emerged from the building. She recognized them from the intelligence photos. Mahmoud Afridi, the loader. 17 confirmed attacks. And Rasul Khan, primary gunner. Younger than the others, maybe 22, but no less dangerous. 3 of 4. One more to go. The 4th man appeared at 0423. Tariq Wazir, secondary gunner and spotter. He carried a pair of binoculars and moved with the nervous energy of someone who expected trouble. He scanned the perimeter, the riverbank, the hills to the south. His gaze passed over her position without stopping. She was invisible, a ghost in a concrete pipe, watching death approach through a German-made scope mounted on an American rifle. 4 targets, all visible, all in the open. She began her calculations. 847 meters. Wind from the east at 6 knots. Temperature affecting ballistics by a factor she had memorized years ago. She adjusted her scope 2 clicks right, 1 click up, settled the crosshairs on Hassan's chest, center mass, the largest target area. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat steadied. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. But she did not fire. Not yet. They were setting up the mortar, but they had not loaded it. She needed them committed to the firing sequence, focused on their task, not scanning for threats. The moment they dropped the first round into the tube, they would be at their most vulnerable. That was when she would strike. She watched Hassan inspect the mortar tube, watched Afridi prepare the ammunition, watched Khan and Wazir take their positions on either side of the pit. Any minute now, any second, Hassan gave an order. Afridi lifted the first mortar round. Vishenko exhaled half her breath and held it. Her finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the center of Hassan's chest, on the eagle, globe, and anchor that he had no right to wear. She thought of the private who died believing in her. Thought of Fuentes bleeding on the ground. Thought of 6 Marines who would never go home because of the men in her sights. The mortar round slid into the tube with a hollow metallic sound. She began to squeeze. She did not fire. Something moved at the edge of her scope. A fifth figure emerging from the main building, walking toward the mortar pit with a cup of tea in his hands. Civilian clothes. No weapon. He stopped to talk with Hassan, gesturing casually, completely unaware that a rifle was aimed at the space he now occupied. Vishenko held her breath and waited. The man was directly in her line of fire. If she took the shot now, the round would pass through Hassan and into the civilian behind him. 2 bodies for 1 bullet. And suddenly her clean mission would become an international incident, a propaganda victory for the Taliban, proof that Americans killed innocent people without discrimination. She could not take that shot. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Afridi was adjusting the mortar tube. Khan was checking the ammunition. The civilian kept talking, oblivious to how close he was standing to a dead man. Move, she thought. Just move 3 steps to the left, and this is over. He did not move. Her lungs began to ache. She had been holding her breath for nearly a minute, waiting for a clear shot that refused to materialize. The pre-dawn light was growing stronger. Soon the shadows that concealed her would begin to fade. Soon she would be visible to anyone looking in the right direction. Still the civilian talked. Still Hassan listened. Still the shot remained impossible. Then a voice called from inside the building. The civilian turned, said something in Pashto, and walked back toward the door. Clear. Vishenko realigned her crosshairs and began her squeeze again. But now Hassan had moved. He was partially behind the sandbag wall, only his shoulder and head visible. The shot was possible, but not ideal. A headshot at 800 meters in low light with no spotter to confirm her windage. She had trained for this. She could make this shot, but doubt crept in anyway. The same doubt Crenshaw had tried to plant. The same doubt that had followed her through every day of her career. The voice that whispered she was not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy of the rifle in her hands. She thought of her father. The last hunt before the cancer took him. He had been too weak to hold the rifle, so she had done it for him, taking down a 10-point buck at 400 meters while he watched through binoculars with tears in his eyes. You have a gift, little wolf. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. She steadied her breathing, pushed the doubt down into the dark place where it belonged, found the cold center of focus that separated good shooters from great ones. Hassan stepped out from behind the sandbags. Now, the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The sound cracked across the valley like thunder. And 847 meters away, Farid Hassan dropped to the ground with a hole in his chest where the stolen eagle, globe, and anchor used to be. 1. She worked the bolt without thinking, muscle memory taking over. The spent casing ejected and a fresh round chambered in less than a second. Her scope found Afridi, the loader, frozen in shock, staring at his fallen leader. She fired. The round took him center mass, and he crumpled beside the mortar pit. 2. Chaos erupted in the compound. Shouting, screaming. The remaining 2 targets were moving now, running for cover, their training finally kicking in past the shock of watching 2 men die in as many seconds. Khan was faster. He sprinted toward the main building, legs pumping, arms swinging. Vishenko tracked him, calculated his speed, led him by 2 body lengths. She fired. The round caught him mid-stride. His legs tangled, and he went down hard, sliding across the dirt, leaving a dark trail behind him. 3. Wazir had made it to the corner of the building. He was almost behind cover, almost safe, just his right arm and shoulder visible as he reached for the door. This was the impossible shot, a partial target at extreme range in rapidly changing light conditions. The kind of shot that instructors used as examples of what not to attempt. She took it anyway. The rifle cracked. The round crossed 800 meters in less than a second. It struck Wazir's extended arm, passed through muscle and bone, and continued into his torso. He spun sideways and collapsed against the wall, then slid to the ground and went still. 4. The compound erupted with activity. Men pouring out of buildings, weapons in hand, searching for the source of shots. But there was nothing to see, just empty hillside and morning shadows and 4 bodies cooling in the dust. Vishenko allowed herself one breath, one moment of acknowledgement that she had done what everyone said was impossible. For shots, for kills. No spate, no backup. 847 meters in pre-dawn light after swimming across a freezing river in the dark. Then she began breaking down her position. The mission was only half complete. She still had to get home. She collapsed her rifle with practice speed, securing it in the waterproof case. Ammunition pouches sealed. Scope protected. Every piece of evidence that she had been here erased from the culvert. Voices were getting closer. Flashlight beams stabbing through the growing dawn. The enemy was searching for her now, spreading out from the compound in a widening pattern. They knew approximately where the shots had come from. It was only a matter of time before they found the culvert. She had to move. The original plan was to wait for extraction at the river. But that plan assumed she would have time after the engagement. It assumed the enemy would be confused, disorganized, slow to respond. They were none of those things. She crawled out of the culvert on her belly and began moving south, away from the compound, away from the river, away from the only route home she had planned. Behind her, the shouts grew louder. Closer. The hunt was on. The ground was unforgiving. Rocks bit into her elbows and knees as she crawled through the scrub, moving south while the enemy searched north. Every few meters she stopped, listened, adjusted her route based on the sounds of pursuit. They were organized, more organized than she had expected. Multiple search parties spreading out in a systematic grid, flashlights sweeping the terrain, voices calling to each other in Pashto. Someone was directing them, coordinating the hunt with professional precision. Vishenko pressed herself flat against the earth and waited as a 2-man patrol passed within 20 meters of her position. She could hear their breathing, their footsteps, the rustle of their clothing. One of them stopped and scanned the darkness with his flashlight. The beam passed over her, paused, moved on. She did not breathe until they were gone. The river was not an option anymore. They would have men watching the water, waiting for her to try the same crossing that had brought her here. She needed another way out. She pulled up the mental map she had built during her observation hours. The compound was northeast. The river was east. To the south was open terrain leading to a road. To the west were hills that would provide cover, but no extraction point. The road. It was her only chance. She changed direction and began moving west, circling around the search pattern, using every fold in the terrain to stay hidden. The sky was lightening rapidly now, gray bleeding into pink on the eastern horizon. She had maybe 30 minutes before full daylight made concealment impossible. A voice shouted in the distance. Then another. The search parties were converging on something. The culvert. They had found her hide site. She moved faster, abandoning stealth for speed. The rifle case bounced against her back as she ran in a low crouch, weaving between rocks and scrub bushes. Behind her, the shouting intensified. They knew she was close. They knew she was running. The terrain dipped into a shallow ravine, and she slid down the embankment, landing hard at the bottom. Pain flared in her left ankle, but she pushed through it, scrambling up the opposite side and continuing west. The hills rose ahead of her, dark shapes against the brightening sky. If she could reach them, she could find cover, find a place to hide until nightfall, wait for another chance to move. But the hills were 2 kilometers away and the enemy was closing. She heard the engine before she saw the vehicle. A pickup truck, modified with a mounted gun in the bed, racing along a dirt road that cut across her path. It was heading toward the compound, probably responding to the alarm. An insane idea formed in her mind. She changed course and sprinted toward the road, timing her approach to intercept the vehicle at a bend where the driver would have to slow down. The rifle case slapped against her back. Her ankle screamed with every step. She ignored it all and ran. The truck came around the bend, and she was there, standing in the middle of the road, rifle raised. The driver saw her and slammed on the brakes. Too late. She fired through the windshield, and the driver slumped over the wheel. The truck swerved, tires screaming, and crashed into a ditch at the side of the road. She was moving before the dust settled. The passenger was struggling with his door, dazed from the impact. She shot him through the window. The gunner in the bed was trying to swing the mounted weapon toward her. She put 2 rounds in his chest, and he fell backward out of the truck. 3 more dead, 7 rounds remaining in her magazine. She pulled the driver's body out of the cab and climbed behind the wheel. The engine was still running, somehow undamaged by the crash. She threw it into reverse, hauled the truck back onto the road, and floored the accelerator. The compound flashed past on her right. She caught a glimpse of men pointing, shouting, scrambling for vehicles to pursue. Then it was behind her, and she was racing west along the dirt road, dust billowing in her wake. 2 vehicles appeared in her mirror. They were faster than her truck and gaining quickly. Muzzle flashes sparked in the dim light, and she heard bullets punch into the tailgate. She pushed the accelerator to the floor, but the old truck had nothing left to give. The needle was buried, and still they were closing. The road curved ahead, following the contour of the hills. Beyond the curve was the river, not the section she had crossed, but somewhere upstream where the water might be shallower. She had no plan beyond that. No extraction point, no backup, just a desperate hope that she could reach the water before they reached her. The first pursuing vehicle pulled alongside. She saw the passenger leaning out with an AK-47, taking aim at her tires. She grabbed her pistol from its holster and fired through the window, one-handed, steering with her left. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make him duck back inside. The curve came up fast, too fast. She hit the brakes, and the truck fishtailed, tires losing grip on the loose dirt. For a moment, she was certain she was going to roll. Then the tires caught, and she was through the curve, the river appearing ahead like a dark ribbon cutting through the valley. She aimed the truck at the water and did not slow down. The impact was violent. The truck hit the river at 60 kilometers per hour, and the world became chaos. Water exploded through the shattered windshield. The engine died. Momentum carried the vehicle forward until it lodged against a submerged rock formation, tilted at a crazy angle, half in and half out of the current. Vishenko kicked, opened the door, and let the river take her. Cold. So cold. But she had done this before. She knew how to survive the cold. She swam with the current, letting it carry her downstream while her pursuers stood on the bank, firing blindly into the water. The bullets passed around her, through the space she had occupied a second before, but none found their mark. The current pulled her around a bend, and suddenly she was alone. Just her and the river and the approaching dawn. She swam toward the far bank, toward home. The current carried her downstream for nearly a kilometer before she found the strength to fight toward shore. Her arms felt like they were filled with sand. Her legs barely responded to commands. The cold had sunk so deep in her body that she was not sure she would ever feel warm again. But she kept swimming. The far bank materialized out of the gray morning light, a dark line of mud and reeds that meant safety. She crawled out of the water on her hands and knees, collapsing into the tall grass, her chest heaving with exhaustion. For a long moment, she simply lay there, letting the earth hold her weight, listening to the sound of her own ragged breathing. The rifle case was still on her back. Somehow, impossibly, she had held on to it through everything. The truck crash, the river, the desperate swim. Her father's scope was still with her. She allowed herself 30 seconds of rest. Then she forced herself to move. The FOB was somewhere to the northeast. She had drifted downstream during her swim, away from the section she had crossed the night before. That meant she was in unfamiliar territory, somewhere between the enemy compound and American lines, alone and exhausted and running low on ammunition. She checked her rifle. The waterproof case had held. The weapon was dry, functional, ready. She had 4 rounds left in a magazine and no spares. Her pistol had been lost in the river, torn from her grip by the current. Her knife was still on her belt. It would have to be enough. She started moving northeast, staying low, using the terrain for cover. The sun was climbing now, burning off the morning mist, painting the valley in shades of gold and brown. Beautiful country if you forgot about the men trying to kill you. Voices ahead. She dropped flat and pressed herself into a shallow depression in the ground. 2 men walked past on a dirt path, 30 meters away, rifles slung over their shoulders. They were talking casually, unaware that their mortar team was dead and their compound was in chaos. She let them pass and continued moving. The FOB appeared on the horizon an hour after sunrise. HESCO barriers and guard towers and the American flag hanging limp in the still morning air. The most beautiful thing she had ever seen. But there was open ground between her position and the perimeter. 300 meters of exposed terrain with no cover, no concealment, nothing to hide behind if an enemy patrol spotted her. She studied the ground, planning her approach. The main gate was to the north. She could circle around, come in from that direction, identify herself to the guards before anyone mistook her for a threat. Movement to her left. She spun and raised her rifle, sighting on a figure emerging from behind a rock formation. Her finger touched the trigger, pressure building. Then she recognized the uniform. United States Marine Corps. A young lance corporal with wide eyes and a rifle pointed directly at her chest. Friendly, she called out. Sergeant Vishenko, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. Do not shoot. The lance corporal did not lower his weapon. His hands were shaking. He was terrified. Prove it, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. She slowly raised her hands, keeping the rifle visible but not threatening. My CAC is in my left breast pocket. I'm going to reach for it. Do not shoot me, Marine. She moved with exaggerated slowness, pulling out the military ID card and holding it up where he could see. The lance corporal squinted at it, then at her face, then back at the card. Holy hell, he breathed. You are the sniper. The one who went across the river. That is correct. He finally lowered his weapon, his expression shifting from fear to awe. We thought you were dead. Captain Bledsoe sent the QRF out at 0600, but they could not find any trace. Everyone said you must have drowned. Reports of my death were exaggerated. The lance corporal laughed, a nervous sound that released the tension from his body. He keyed his radio and spoke rapidly, calling in her position, confirming her identity. Within minutes, more Marines appeared, emerging from the FOB in a patrol formation that quickly transformed into an escort. They walked her through the gate like a returning hero. Word had spread faster than she could move. Marines stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some nodded. Some saluted. One staff sergeant she barely recognized started a slow clap that spread through the gathered crowd. She walked through it all in a daze, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the adrenaline was fading. Her wet suit was torn in a dozen places. Her face was scratched and bruised. She was covered in mud and river water and the grime of night spent crawling through hostile terrain. She had never felt more alive. Captain Bledsoe met her outside the command post. The officer's face was carefully controlled, revealing nothing, but her eyes told a different story. Sergeant Vishenko, she said. Report. Vishenko straightened despite the exhaustion screaming through every muscle. Mission complete, ma'am. Mortar team eliminated. For confirmed kills. I also have intelligence regarding a possible insider threat. Someone on this base has been providing information to the enemy. Bledsoe's expression flickered. We will debrief fully within the hour. But first, get to medical. That is an order. Yes, ma'am. She turned to leave, but Bledsoe's voice stopped her. Sergeant. The captain paused, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. Hell of a job. Vishenko allowed herself a small smile. Thank you, ma'am. She walked toward the medical tent, surrounded by Marines who looked at her differently than they had 24 hours ago. She had left this base as a woman trying to prove herself in a world that did not want her. She was returning as something else, a legend in the making. The medical tent was quiet compared to the chaos outside. A Navy corpsman cleaned and bandaged her wounds while she sat on a cot, staring at the canvas wall without really seeing it. The adrenaline had fully drained now, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made even breathing feel like effort. Her left ankle was sprained, not broken. The cuts on her face and arms were superficial. Mild hypothermia that was already resolving. The corpsman pronounced her lucky and gave her orders to rest for at least 24 hours. She thanked him and walked out the moment his back was turned. Fuentes was in the recovery section, propped up on pillows, his leg elevated and wrapped in fresh bandages. His face lit up when he saw her standing in the doorway. "You look like death," he said. "You should see the other guys." He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. She crossed the tent and sat down on the cot beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with everything that did not need to be said. She reached into her wetsuit and pulled out the street Christopher medal. The chain was broken, but the medal itself was intact, still warm from her skin. She pressed it into his palm. "Told you I would bring it back." Fuentes stared at the medal, then at her, then back at the medal. His eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if he was the kind of man who cried. For 4, he said quietly, "No spate," in the dark, after swimming that river twice. "I had good motivation." He shook his head slowly. "They're going to be telling stories about you for a long time, Sergeant. You know that, right?" She shrugged. "Stories do not interest me. What interests me is finding out who told the enemy where to aim their mortars. Who told them about our mission." Fuentes' expression hardened. "You really think someone on this base is a traitor?" "I know it. I saw the team leader wearing a jacket from our battalion. Someone gave him that. Someone has been feeding them information for weeks. The attack on the sniper billets was not random. They were targeting me specifically." "Then we find them," Fuentes said. His voice had an edge to it now. "We find them, and we make them answer for what they did." She nodded and stood up. "Rest. Heal. I will handle the rest." He caught her arm before she could leave. "Be careful. If there is a traitor, they know you survived. They know you were looking for them. That makes you a target." She smiled without warmth. "Good. Targets are easier to find when they are shooting at you." She left him there and walked toward the command post. Captain Bledsoe was waiting with a small team of intelligence officers and a look on her face that said the debriefing was about to get serious. The next 3 hours were exhausting in a different way. She recounted every detail of the mission, from the river crossing to the kills to the escape. She described the jacket Hassan had been wearing, the unit patch, the implications. The intelligence officers asked questions, probed inconsistencies, demanded clarifications. Through it all, she remained calm and precise. This was just another kind of combat, a battle fought with words instead of bullets. When the debriefing finally ended, Bledsoe dismissed the others and asked Vashenko to stay behind. "The investigation into the insider threat is already underway," the captain said. "We have been monitoring communications for the past 6 hours. The pool of suspects is small and getting smaller." "Anyone I know?" Bledsoe hesitated. "Possibly. We intercepted a coded transmission sent from this base approximately 2 hours before the attack on your billets. The origin point has been narrowed to 3 possible sources." "Who?" The captain shook her head. "I cannot tell you that. Not yet. If you are wrong, we destroy an innocent person's career. If you are right, we risk tipping off the traitor before we have enough evidence to act." Vashenko understood. She did not like it, but she understood. "There is something else," Bledsoe continued. "I submitted your name for a Bronze Star with Valor. Based on your actions last night, I expect it will be approved. You may be looking at a ceremony within the next few weeks. With respect, ma'am, I did not do this for medals. I know. That is exactly why you deserve one." Vashenko left the command post and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The base was returning to normal operations, the excitement of her return already fading into the routine of daily military life. But she could feel eyes on her as she walked. Curious eyes, respectful eyes, eyes that saw her differently than they had before. She found herself walking toward the perimeter toward the Hesco barriers that faced the river. She stood there for a long time, looking out at the water that had nearly killed her, the water she had conquered twice in a single night. Somewhere on the other side, for bodies were being collected. For men who had killed 6 Marines and wounded dozens more. For men who would never fire another mortar round at anyone. She had done that. Alone. Against every expectation. Against every doubt. A voice behind her broke the silence. Sergeant Vishenko. She turned. Gunnery Sergeant Crenshaw stood a few meters away, his expression unreadable. He walked toward her slowly, stopping at the barrier beside her, looking out at the same river. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I heard the debrief," he said finally. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. 4 targets, 800 meters, pre-dawn light. No spate. That is correct. He nodded slowly. Then he did something she had never seen him do before. He extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," he said. Simple, direct. No excuses, no qualifications. Just the admission she had earned through blood and cold water and 4 perfect shots. She looked at his hand for a moment. Then she took it. "Do not let it happen again," she said. Something that might have been a smile crossed his weathered face. "Copy that, Sergeant." The traitor was found 3 days later. Vishenko was in the armory cleaning her rifle when Staff Sergeant Holloman appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his expression caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. "They got him," Holloman said. "The insider. They are taking him into custody right now." She set down her rifle and followed Holloman outside. A small crowd had gathered near the command post, watching as 2 military police officers escorted a man in flex cuffs toward a waiting vehicle. The man was not struggling. His head was down, shoulders slumped, the posture of someone who had already accepted defeat. She recognized him immediately. Habib Nazari, one of the Afghan interpreters. Young, quiet, always helpful. He had been on base for 8 months, translating documents, assisting with local communications, sitting in on briefings where sensitive information was discussed, including the briefing where she had proposed her river crossing mission. She watched them load him into the vehicle, her mind racing through every interaction she had ever had with him. He had always been polite, professional. Nothing about him had seemed suspicious. But that was the point, was it not? The best traders never seemed suspicious until it was too late. Captain Bledsoe appeared beside her as the vehicle drove away. His family, the captain said quietly. The Taliban took his mother and 2 sisters 6 months ago. They have been holding them ever since, demanding information in exchange for their lives. Vishenko said nothing. She understood the calculation Habib had made. Family against strangers. Blood against duty. It was an impossible choice, and he had chosen the only way he knew how. That did not make it right. 6 Marines were dead because of his choices. Fuentes was lying in a hospital cot because of his choices. She had nearly drowned twice because of his choices. But she understood. "What happens to him now?" she asked. Bledsoe's jaw tightened. Detention. Interrogation. Eventually, prosecution. His cooperation will be a factor, but the charges are serious. People died. And his family? We are working with Afghan intelligence to locate them. No guarantees, but we are trying. Vishenko nodded slowly. It was not justice. Not really. There was no justice in a situation where everyone lost. But it was something. An ending, if not a resolution. She returned to the armory and finished cleaning her rifle. The work was meditative, each motion familiar and precise. Strip, clean oil, reassemble. The same ritual she had performed 1,000 times before. The same ritual she would perform 1,000 times again. When she finished, she went to find Fuentes. He was sitting up in bed, reading a battered paperback novel someone had left behind. His color was better, his eyes brighter. The doctors said he would be walking within a week, running within a month. Full recovery expected. "Heard they caught the mole," he said as she sat down. Habib Nazari, one of the interpreters. Fuentes shook his head. "I talked to that guy a dozen times. He helped me write a letter to my mother in Spanish once, just because I mentioned I was homesick. Seemed like a good person. Maybe he was. Maybe good people sometimes make terrible choices." Fuentes considered that for a moment. Then he set aside his book and looked at her directly. What about you, Sergeant? What comes next for the woman who did the impossible? She leaned back in her chair and thought about the question. The Bronze Star ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Crenshaw had recommended her for promotion. Captain Bledsoe had mentioned something about a training assignment stateside, helping develop the program for future female scout snipers. All of it felt distant somehow, abstract, like it was happening to someone else. I do not know, she admitted. For so long, everything was about proving myself, earning the right to be here, showing everyone that I belonged. Now that I have done that, I am not sure what comes next. Fuentes Maiz. Maybe that is the point. You do not have to prove anything anymore. You could just be a Marine. Do the job. Live your life. She considered his words. There was wisdom in them, the kind of wisdom that came from nearly dying and surviving to reflect on it. When you are healed, she said, I want you back as my spotter. If you are willing. His smile widened. Sergeant, after what you pulled off alone, I am pretty sure being your spotter is the safest job in the entire Marine Corps. Of course I am willing. She stood up and offered her hand. He shook it firmly, his grip strong despite the weeks of recovery ahead. Get some rest, she said. We have work to do. She left the medical tent and walked out into the evening air. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and red that had marked the beginning of her mission. The river glinted in the distance, peaceful now, almost beautiful. She touched the pocket where she kept her father's scope. Still there, still with her. A reminder of where she came from and everything she had overcome to get here. You would be proud, Papa, she whispered. I made it. The wind carried her words away toward the mountains, toward the sky, toward wherever the spirits of the dead went when their work was finally done. She stood there until the stars came out, one by one, filling the darkness with points of light. Then she turned and walked back toward the base, toward the life that was waiting for her, toward whatever came next. She was ready. The ceremony took place on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the mission. The entire base turned out for it. 200 Marines standing in formation under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The American flag snapped in the mountain breeze, and somewhere in the distance a helicopter thumped its way toward the horizon. Vishenko stood at attention in her dress uniform, eyes fixed forward, heart beating steady and calm. She had faced death in a frozen river and emerged victorious. A medal ceremony was nothing compared to that. Captain Bledsoe read the citation aloud. The words washed over her like water, familiar phrases about courage and valor and service above self. She heard them without really listening, her mind drifting to the moments that mattered more than any official commendation. The private's hand in hers as he bled out on a stretcher. Fuentes pressing the Street Christopher medal into her palm. The cold shock of the river closing over her head. For crosshairs settling on 4 targets. Crenshaw's hand extended in acknowledgement of everything he had gotten wrong. Those are the things she would remember, not the medal. Bledsoe finished reading, and a senior officer stepped forward. Brigadier General Marcus Webb, visiting from Bagram for the occasion. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of presence that made everyone around him stand a little straighter. He pinned the Bronze Star with valor to her chest, the metal cool against her uniform, the weight barely noticeable. Then he stepped back and saluted. She returned the salute with precision. The formation applauded. Not the restrained clapping of military protocol, but genuine applause, the kind that came from respect earned rather than rank demanded. She saw Holloman in the crowd, clapping hard. She saw Karzai near the back, his face solemn but proud. She saw Crenshaw standing with the sniper platoon, his hands coming together with the rest. And she saw someone else, a young woman standing at the edge of the formation, civilian clothes, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She could not have been more than 17 years old. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling through the tears. Vishenko recognized her immediately, even though they had never met. The ceremony ended and the formation dispersed. Vishenko made her way through the crowd of handshakes and congratulations, working toward the young woman who had not moved from her spot. They stood face to face, and for a moment neither spoke. You are Kaylee, Vishenko said. The girl nodded. You knew my brother. I did. He was brave. And he loved you very much. Kaylee's composure cracked, and the tears came freely now. He wrote me about you, she said. In his last letter, he said you were going to stop the men who were hurting people. He said you were proof that I could do anything I wanted. Vishenko reached out and took the girl's hands in hers. She felt the trembling, the grief, the desperate need for something to hold on to. He was right, she said. You could do anything. And if you still want to be a sniper, you come find me when you're old enough. I will teach you everything I know. Kaylee threw her arms around her and held on like she was drowning. Vishenko held her back. This stranger who was not a stranger. This sister of a boy who had died believing in something good. They stood that way for a long time. Later, after Kaylee had been escorted to her transport back to the States, Vishenko found herself at the river's edge again. It had become her thinking spot, the place where she came to process everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. Fuentes appeared beside her, walking with a slight limp that the doctor said would fade with time. Hell of a day, he said. Hell of a month. He laughed quietly. So what now, Sergeant? Where do we go from here? She looked out at the water, at the current that had tried to kill her and failed. Captain Bledsoe had mentioned a new mission. A high-value target 60 kilometers south. Protected position. Difficult approach. Another river to cross. She smiled. Now we get back to work. Fuentes nodded. He did not ask for details. He did not need to. He would be there when she needed him, watching the angles she could not see, trusting her to make the shots that mattered. That was what partners did. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in familiar shades of fire. She thought about her father, about the little girl in Pennsylvania who had learned to shoot before she could ride a bicycle. She thought about the boy who had become a woman, who had become a warrior, who had become a legend. She thought about all the people who had said she cannot do it. And she thought about all the people who would come after her, the women who would follow the path she had carved through doubt and cold water and enemy fire. She had not done this just for herself. She had done it for all of them. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength against all odds. Vishenko reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's scope. She held it up to her eye one last time, looking at the river, at the mountains, at the endless Afghan sky. Thank you, Papa, she whispered, for everything. Then she tucked the scope away, turned from the water, and walked toward whatever came next. Behind her, the Helmand River flowed on, indifferent to the woman who had crossed it, indifferent to the legend that had been born in its depths. But the Marines of FOB Copperhead would remember. They would tell the story for years to come. The story of the sergeant who slipped into the river at dusk and found 4 targets by midnight. The story of the woman who proved them all wrong. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go to watch over the living, a young private with a stomach wound smiled and whispered to his sister, I told you she would do it. I told you she was real.